load too many pages.
Me? Load too many pages? I wouldn't dare. Hi, welcome to another episode of Lucky Paper Radio. My name is Andy, and I'm here as always with my co-host, Anthony. If he was a narrow tutor, he'd have squirrel cycling Maddox.
I would love to have squirrel cycling.
Just kill yourself for a squirrel?
No. In the narrative magic, it's not like that at all. I would just never have begun to exist in the first place in for
You would never have begun to exist, but someone would think about yourself, and then they would forget about you, and they would instead think about a squirrel. They would try really hard to think about you, and a squirrel would just pop up instead. And they'd be like, all right, there we go.
Great. I love Wizardcycling. I wish there was more creature type cycling. That'd be great.
I really love the, I know we've talked about this tweet, and it's gauche to talk about how funny a tweet is, but the post about how mill decks are just bimboifying your opponent in the in the logic of magic, just making you unable to think. You're so bimboified, you die. It's very funny to me.
Yeah.
Narrow tutors, Anthony.
Oh, we're not talking. This isn't the squirrels episode.
We can do squirrels. I could drop everything right now and do a squirrels episode.
There's so many squirrels outside. I was watching a couple this morning, and it's just like there's just so many of you. It's great. Despite the fox population in our local neighborhood, there are still many squirrels.
I just took Sadie for a walk in this apocalyptic air quality, and there was a gaggle, a murder of crows in the backyard of my neighbor, just gawking and squawking, and one of them looked like a big blue bottle cap in its beak, and standing amongst them,
he was the king.
Standing amongst them was just a single squirrel. Just they were all hanging out, and then they like squawked at me when I got near them, and then the squirrel ran away, and the crows flew away. But they were all just having a little meeting.
It's basically what my neighborhood's looking like. It's just like starling, squirrel, and they're all just like neatly spaced out in the grass. None of them had a treasure, so I don't know who the king of the starlings was.
Anyway, narrow tutors.
Okay, fine.
Narrow tutors, Anthony.
Okay, let's talk about Magic the Gathering. Let's go down
and talk about some narrow tutors. Oh, actually, can I do a quick addendum to our second most recent episode at the time of recording?
Sure.
We did our episode Cards That Are Cool. Completely forgot one. Just completely forgot one when I made my notes. I went through and just completely skipped one.
It would be shocking if you didn't forget several. There are so many Magic cards out there.
I'm not going to name all. You know what I mean?
Many of them are cool.
I forgot one that I meant to mention and would have for sure been in my top 5, and it's Sphinx Reclamation. I'm putting that card in every cube.
That is a cool card. This is a card that I still feel like I see in cubes, and it goes way later than it should. Like, that card is just so powerful, and people still don't respect it. And I feel like there's a lot of cards that have a similar sort of life cycle, similar narrative of like, oh yeah, this is something from a Commander product, so people don't really know it. It doesn't have like a proven track record in a constructed format, and so it goes overlooked for a little while, and then people are like, oh, this card's cracked. I'm always going to take it. And Sphinx Reclamation still seems like it's under the radar some 8 years after it was first printed or something.
Who knows? But it is kind of messed up. It's really strong. I will say it does have one thing. I think I'm going to add it to Sacred Geometry because it feels pretty sacred to me. It's got one little tiny hiccup on it, which is that when you flash it back, do you know how this works?
So it's 3 mana.
What do you think the rules
mana,
text
you get a permanent with converted mana cost 3 or less, and then flashback for 5. Does it copy the spell, or do you get to target 2 things?
It copies, but it copies on resolution. So if they counter the flashback, you don't get 2 copies. You only get the copy of the spell when the first one resolves, which is a little tiny hiccup, which is a little annoying. But if it weren't for that little hiccup, I think it's basically a perfect, clean, elegant card. So I am going to try it in Sacred Geometry. I got a request for it this morning and was like, yeah, let me give that a try. It's a perfectly clean card that it does 2 like obvious things on the tin, which I think are great. One is like
get a thing back, and 2 is get 2 things back.
If you are a deck that is intentionally putting permanents in the graveyard or you're self-milling, like I don't think in the average cube it's necessarily insane as a main deck card, because some matchups you're not going to have stuff going to the graveyard, and then this card is not a card you want, especially in the early game. So even though it's strong, I don't think it's like a windmill slam in all decks, but it's definitely windmill slam in your deck if you have any self-sacrificing stuff. If you like have ways to sacrifice your own stuff and get it back for value, it's great in those decks. The other thing it's great at, just, very cleanly, is just such a good card against control. You're removing my stuff.
Right.
This is a threat, and it's a threat that draws another double threat. Means that, one counter spell. It doesn't feel that good to counterspell Sphinx Reclamation. Sometimes you got to do it, but it doesn't feel great.
Although apparently it feels good to counter the flashback.
Yeah. It's just like a natural 2-for-1 against control, or 3-for-1, depending on how they answer it, if they answer it. Yeah, Sphinx Reclamation, another card that is cool, but not a narrow tutor. How's that for a beautiful segue?
Unless you're putting so many things in your graveyard, you basically feel like you have access to your whole deck.
That is actually kind of how a lot of those cards play. Like, I think Regrowth is like a narrow tutor, sort of.
I'll count it.
Well, I'm not going to. For our definition of narrow tutor. This came up when we were talking about mystical teachings in the Cards That Are Cool episode, and I said, maybe we should do a whole episode on narrow tutors. And we got at least 2 comments in different venues of people saying, yes, do that episode on narrow tutors. So here we are doing the episode on narrow tutors. For the purposes of this conversation, I'm going to take a brief look. People get mad when I define things. Some people love when I define things. For the purposes of this conversation...
Does anyone love it?
Yes. Many people love it.
Name them.
I'm not going to read all the comments and read their usernames out. For the purposes of this conversation, I'm defining a narrow tutor as something that is a card that searches your library for another card. And the limitations on the card it can search for means that you have a pretty direct ability as a cube designer to control what that card ends up doing in your environment. I'm not going to count something and can find whole card types. If you can find a whole creature or a whole, sorcery or whatever, I think that's a little bit more vague. Instant and sorcery kind of feel like the same thing.
You want to be more narrow than just Enlightened Tutor and Mystical Tutor, which
yes,
I would call pretty narrow.
I put them in my maybe narrow category when I went through all my cubes, but when I'm thinking about the class of cards that I think we are having a conversation about, it's really hard to make sure that you have total grasp on exactly what people can do with something like Mystical Tutor in a cube, because there's so many instants and sorceries across all the different colors. It's how do you control this? Meanwhile, I think a 4-mana card that gets just instants or cards with flash, instants and cards with flash, is sufficiently narrow that I feel like you can control for that a little better. So completely subjective and, vibes-based definition, but I'm personally excluding things like Enlightened Tutor, Mystical Tutor, Green Sun Zenith, Birthing Pod, Bring to Light. All these things are they can get a pretty wide class of things so that it's hard to control exactly what they get. Now, admittedly, with something like Birthing Pod, obviously it's any one activation is pretty narrow because you're only getting cards of a very specific mana value, but ultimately it can get any creature in the cube, assuming that there's a creature in the cube that has mana value less than the one you're getting, one less than the one you're getting.
Sure. I mean, obviously it's a spectrum, and unlike some of the things that we try to define, I think this is a more clear spectrum. Demonic Tutor's on one end. It's a card, just gets anything, and the card that lets you get exactly a certain planeswalker. Step through. Well, Step through is even pretty wide because it gets any wizard. That's a lot of wizards.
But here's the thing, Wizardcycling can be as broad or as near, that's what I mean by you having control over what the narrow tutor does.
I think some of the other really narrow examples are things like Tribute Mage and Trinket Mage in that category that gets
totally counts.
Artifact of a specific mana value, because that is so easy to, especially when we're talking in the context of cube design, be here's a card that can get these 6 to 12 options. That is pretty narrow. Maybe that's a good way to think about it. It's just in a cube list, if not narrow is it can get 360 cards, Enlightened Tutor can, or maybe Mystical Tutor is a better example, any instant or sorcery is still going to be 100 cards out of the 360 maybe.
And to be fair, you could definitely design the cube to have very few enchantments and artifacts, and then you absolutely are turning Enlightened Tutor into the kind of narrow tutor we're talking about. I think in the average cube list, if there's more than, call it 30 or 40 cards you could get, I think it's kind of escaping containment in terms of how much you can really control.
Right, and I think just from a gameplay perspective, those feel totally different because I'm putting Demonic Tutor in my deck for a totally different reason than I'm putting Tribute Mage.
Unless you're playing the Turbo Cube and then they both get Guild Globe.
Yeah, sure, they will always both get Guild Globe, which is, obviously what you want to be doing. Does Guild Globe actually cost 2 or does it cost 1? I'm totally broken because of the Turbo Cube. It doesn't matter.
And also, Demonic Tutor is not in the Turbo Cube, so this is
is not
pointless comment
I'm
making.
But I think that's a good sort of next point is that I think of myself as somebody that doesn't really enjoy tutors, and part of that is I can defend objectively and say they kind of reduce gameplay variance in a certain way, or gameplay variety, and a lot of that experience is maybe tainted by playing a little bit too much Commander, where it's here's this 100-card singleton format. The point is the gameplay is going to be really varied, and you're going to be doing different things because you have so many cards in your deck and they're all unique, and then it's but here's Demonic Tutor, I'm just going to cut that variance in half. Just kind of goes against what I think what was appealing to me about that format, at least. But when I looked at my cubes, there were actually a lot more tutors than I realized, but they are all in this very, very narrow end of the spectrum, which I feel in cube specifically feels totally different.
I also went through all my cube lists and pulled all the narrow tutors. I found, I think, a total of 13 that pretty strictly fit my definition of narrow tutors that aren't so broad that they can be anything. I'm also, I should say,
cutting out lands because
I'm cutting out things that tutor lands, and lands are interesting because obviously there's tons of lands in your cube, and there's going to be tons in people's decks, but so few of them do anything other than make mana that it's pretty easy to turn an Elvish Reclaimer or a Knight of the Reliquary into a narrow tutor as well, because you put, call it 3 to 6 lands in the cube that like have some specific utility, or in the case of Reclaimer and Knight, have utility on ETB at instant speed, right? You put in like...
Right, it feels very different when you have the opportunity to get Bajuka Bog, which is like a gameplay effect rather than just fixing your mana.
Or Talon Gates of Madara or whatever, which can then, phase out a creature. Like, yeah. So I think you can definitely play those like narrow tutors. Again, the classification is truly unimportant, because I think the way we should talk about this is I want to talk about a couple of like specific case studies of narrow tutors that I have included in my cubes across all my different cubes, and talk about how I designed their available card pool, their available targets to create the play experience that I wanted. Does that sound like a reasonable approach for you as well?
It does. One more question about like the sort of definition though. Obviously being able to get just a specific subset of cards makes a lot of sense. What about tutors that come with some like additional restriction? Like you mentioned Birthing Pod, like sure that's a tutor, but you need a certain resource to be able to use it. Or Academy Rector is a card that I played with this weekend at CubeCon DMV, and that's like a very specific, it is a narrow tutor, but it also requires specific setup. You need to cast this 4-mana creature, and then it has to die, so you can go get an enchantment.
And that one also cheats mana costs. Like, is
right,
Tinker a tutor? Sort of, yeah. But I think the fact that in Academy Rector in Tinker's case, the fact that you're cheating into play is kind of more important a lot of times than the tutor aspect, maybe. I mean, it's kind of both. It's pretty rare to play Tinker or Academy Rector as like a toolbox, where it's like, I'm going to get this 2-mana enchantment. You're not doing that with Academy Rector. You're getting Omniscience.
I'm putting Tinker in the Turbo Cube.
I think Tinker would be so sick in the Turbo Cube. I'm actually like surprised it's not there.
Yeah, me too. But also, okay, let's come back.
What's the best thing you can get?
Obviously, you're going to get the Aetherflux Reservoir, or what's it called?
Aetherflux Reservoir, but you're already down 2 cards?
If
you can still go off after being down 2 cards on your Aetherflux Reservoir, I think it's worth it.
Okay, adding a card to my list here.
Also, we got a great comment today on a podcast episode from over a year ago talking about the Turbo Cube, where someone said, I went through the list, and it seems like none of the great recommendations from this episode were included. Is the Turbo Cube dead? Did you decide all of these recommendations were bad?
Yes, I correctly identified all the recommendations as bad. Look, I finally just ordered a bunch of cards for the first time in a long time for a cube project, and the Turbo
some
Cube,
Turbo ones in there?
Not yet. I didn't have the bandwidth for it. I was just like, we're getting this project done because it has to.
I also did that for that project. I just got it done.
Great, just get it done. Yeah, I don't know, but I think that to the point that like maybe what we'll get to is that I like the narrow tutors because they do sort of push like specific deck building agendas, and I think that some of those tutors that come with additional costs or additional setup do something similar, where they're not just like, here's the most flexible card, or here is another copy of the best card in your deck. They are, here's some kind of like build around restriction that's forcing you to make decisions about what your deck looks like.
Yeah, I think these are all great, and honestly, like, I think I had the same attitude towards tutors as you did when I first started my cube design journey, like a decade ago.
No, never mind. That's not Tinker. That's a crazy fabricate. I was about to say, Tinker is in the Turbo Cube, but it's not.
Cool. I think when I started my cube design journey 10 years ago, I was very much of the same opinion as you, because we came from Commander. I think you and I both sort of had the idea of like, look, I'm playing Singleton because I don't want my deck to do the exact same thing in every single game.
Right, that's a good way to put it.
And so a lot of my feelings about tutors carried over into cube design, and I was like, I don't just want people to go get their best card every single time. I don't want to have to, like, as a cube designer, be really careful about not including really good cards, because once I do and you just tutor from every game, it like warps everything around them. So I included no tutors for the longest time. And then, some of the more like narrow ones sort of snuck in. Like Green Sun Zenith is probably one of the first tutors that I added, but again, it's like you're not getting the same thing with Green Sun Zenith in most cube games. You're getting whatever's next on your curve. It's like a very flexible. Yeah. It's like an overcosted, clone for whatever is your next thing on curve in your deck, right? Which is a really cool space for a green deck to be. So some of them started to sneak their way in, and then honestly, I think a big breaking point for me is I put a bunch of tutors and 100 ornithopters because I like wanted them to be there. I actually recently just cut a bunch of them for unrelated reasons, but I played with a lot of tutors and 100 ornithopters and felt that it was more dynamic and interesting than I thought. Even in a cube where like so few of your cards actually matter, it still didn't feel like putting a demonic tutor and a vampiric tutor and an imperial seal and a beseech the mirror and like all these other sort of tutors in actually made it so that games were boring and just playing out the same way every time. There was still a lot of dynamism that was going on there.
Right, and I think we talked about in the previous episode about tutors how they can sometimes, like, counterintuitively, like, in the bigger sense, create more variety because they can enable decks that otherwise just wouldn't make sense at all. Like, you're not going to build around this one individual card that you really, really need, but maybe you will if you have access to a couple ways to get it.
Yeah, and shout out to our previous episode on tutors, which we'll put in the show notes. Playing with tutors in there kind of changed my perceptions a little bit, and I was like, maybe I'm too harsh on these search your library for a cards. And then when I built Sacred Geometry, I was like, you know what's sacred? Demonic Tutor, and just jammed it in there, and I've loved it. I have not felt that it's been problematic or weird. As I sit here today, like, I'm much more inclined to just like put a bunch of tutors in a cube, just kind of see what happens, see what sort of options it opens up. I do think it's like there's a lot of volatility in Tutors. Like, you're potentially throwing in a lot of, like, variety into the decks in a way that, like, if you did make a egregious design mistake, it'll be more obvious with the Tutors, maybe. But if you didn't, maybe it'll allow some other more expressive decks to kind of come out of nowhere in a way that's very cool. So my current attitude about them is, I think, much more welcoming to them than you are, and I'm more likely to include them in a new cube list just because I'm like, yeah, put a bunch of cool cards here. I want people to be able to do the cool card stuff more often.
When you put it that way, it makes a lot of sense.
Now, I want to talk about a couple like unique individual case studies from my cubes. How many narrow tutors do you want to talk about from your cube list to tell a little tale of how you sort of made it work?
There's still not a lot. There's a fair amount of like land tutoring in regular cube. There's maybe 3 things that I think would be reasonable to talk about in regular cube. Turbo cube, it is just a big spectrum because, I mean, like we talked about, is tutoring lands relevant? I think that Expedition Map kind of does count as a conditional tutor in the Turbo cube because there's such a variety of things that are impactful. You're getting your Urza Saga, you're getting your Gaia's Cradle, like things that are really
Your deck can be built around.
Gameplay, what your deck is built around. So I think there's more of a spectrum there.
Urza Saga itself, also a narrow tutor.
Also true. I don't know, where would you start?
I want to start, actually, I'll go in order of like most iconic cube cards to like lesser known weirdos that are in Take 5. The first one that comes to mind for me is Stoneforge Mystic. This is a card that is in so many cubes. 1 and white for a 1/2, Core Artificer, comes into play, search your library for an equipment card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then has the ability to cheat that equipment in for 2 mana and tapping it. This is, I think, one of the most prevalent, ubiquitous, narrow tutors in existence, and there's a very important question I have to ask whenever I see this card in a pack, or I see it in a cube list, which for me is Cauldron Complete or Battle Skull also in this cube? Because those are the 2 equipments at time of recording that I'm aware of that also come along with their own body and create a really big creature that basically turns Stoneforge Mystic from just a like toolboxy, narrow tutor into a like cheating mana kind of card, right? Like you shouldn't get a 4 mana vigilance, lifelink, or whatever Batter Skull is for 2 mana, like 4/4. Did I say 4 mana? Mm-hmm. You shouldn't get a 4/4 with vigilance and lifelink for 2 mana. That's kind of out of bounds, at least as far as I consider fair magic. And Cauldron Complete, whatever that is, a 5/5 haste, every deals damage, things get exiled, whatever Cauldron Complete is.
Indestructible, probably.
It's definitely indestructible.
Yeah, I think that Stoneforge Mystic is a card with a very cool story in Cube, because I think that it initially was played almost exclusively with cards like that, where it really felt not like a narrow tutor, but just a combo card. Like, you just need to draft
That's a much better way to put it.
Something else, and then you get this like extreme advantage that might not win the game outright, but is going to be really hard to beat. I think that specifically because they have just really broadened the design for equipments and things like Lion Sash, and can you think of some other equipments that are like not only...
Oh, can I? Glimmer Lens, Quarry Steel Cutter.
These are cards that are like extremely powerful, but also like useful on specific board states. And so I've seen more and more people put this in cubes where it is like that legitimate toolboxy card. And it's not just getting this huge thing. It is powerful because of its flexibility of being able to play on different board states. And that's been very cool to see. And I think that question of like, oh, is this a combo card here or a toolbox card here is more easy to suss out. And you're not defaulting as much in most cubes, at least in the cubes I've been playing, to this is probably just a combo card.
Which is a conversation I've had many times in the Blood Magic cube, because that's a cube that plays tons of iconic, powerful cards, and certainly like Batter Skull is not too powerful for that cube. It's not even too powerful for that cube in combination with Stoneforge Mystic, to be honest. Like, by turn 3, you might have, shit out a 4/4, but like your blue opponent could just put a Murktide Region and play it that same turn, conceivably that could be huge. So I intentionally excluded there because I don't want people's perceptions to be that, oh, this is a combo card with Batter Skull. And instead I want people to go look for the Lion Sash, the Glimmer Lens, the Quarry Steel Cutter. I think it's actually really interesting with Embercleave, which you're still technically kind of cheating the mana cost on it, but so much of Embercleave's value is your opponent doesn't know about it when they go to block, and so if you reveal it when you tutor it up, it's like this kind of interesting tension. I only have 7 cards right now in Bun Magic that you can get, and it's all the ones I mentioned, plus Rabbit Battery, Umezawa's Cheetah, and Grafted War Gear, which is a very small pool of cards that you can pull from, but that is how I have dialed in Stoneforge Mystic to do what I wanted to do in that environment.
Yeah, War Gear is another good example of sometimes on some board states you just need a big creature, and like having that flexibility makes it a cool card to play with. This is also in the Turbo Cube. There you're probably getting Nettle Cyst or Skull Clamp, but maybe sometimes you just really need Pathway Arrows for some reason.
I mean, I can think of a reason. It's a combo card in that
You
cube.
need a Ring of Vulcus because you really just need to give haste to a creature.
That one I really suspect of.
But who knows? That's kind of a little bit of a benchmark card in this cube where it's like, you kind of know what this card is for. It's supposed to do this really powerful thing. Here in the environment where everything is powered up, it's operating on like a new kind of novel axis of actually you're just getting something kind of weird, and it's a marginal value card, which I don't know, I still enjoy playing with in that context.
just, I think, to put a bow on the Button Magic Cube, I also include Urza Saga. I don't think it's worth talking about that. That's a card you can hear talked about in many different Cube podcasts if you want. The other card I include that I think falls pretty clearly into the narrow tutor category is a relatively new one, which is Brightglass Gearhulk, and it's one I've had a lot of fun with in this cube. That's green, green, white, white for a 4/4 artifact creature construct with first strike and trample, and when it enters, you search your library for up to 2 artifact, creature, and/or enchantment cards with mana value 1 or less, reveal them, put them into your hand, and shuffle. It can find Urza Saga, which is an enchantment card, mana value 1 or less. And the reason I want to talk about this one is because this did not require me to do anything to support it per se. My cube is already really low curving. It already includes a lot of cards that meet this condition, probably many, many more than the 30 or 40 I suggested would constitute a narrow tutor pool in the early part of this episode. But it did cause me to specifically seek out a couple of cards to add just to give it more range, right? Okay, you can get 1-drop creatures. Great. Maybe the baseline of this card is just to get 1-drop creatures and put them into play. I wanted you to be able to get removal. And so I already had a portable hole in the cube, which you could get with Brightglass Gearhulk, but I decided to also add Meltstrider's Resolve, which is an aura that on ETB causes the creature to fight a creature an opponent controls, which is a card that you wouldn't think is Blood Magic power level. And outside of Brightglass Gearhulk, I think it's a little suspect, but it also gives +2 toughness, and that means you're going to win a lot of fights. And yeah, I don't know. I added Meltstrider's Resolve with the specific idea of Brightglass Gearhulk, and I think that brings up an interesting conversation point, which is sometimes these narrow tutors, you do add support for them in sort of intended targets for them that I think, absent the narrow tutor, maybe are pretty suspect in the cube, which means that I think it's very likely, I would put it at 80%, unless the packs break really weird, whatever player ends up with Brightglass Gearhulk is also going to have Meltstrider's Resolved in the Button Magic Cube. You were going to wheel Meltstrider's Resolved at basically every table if you have the Brightglass Gearhulk. It's kind of a gimme. You kind of just get it, which is maybe a negative if you're thinking as a cube designer, you're you don't want to have these prescriptive picks, you don't want to have bad cards in the pack that you know are going to go late. But it's also kind of interesting as a cube designer to know that okay, this is going to go late, which means that I have control over essentially just making Brightglass Gearhulk that much better. It reminds me a little bit of the conversation we've had in the past about how I like to include some underpowered gold cards, where
right,
it's
I was thinking exactly the same.
Where the gold card is kind of comparable to a monocolored option, and it just means that if you're the blue-white control deck, you're going to get No More Lies. I put No More Lies in the Button Magic Cube because it's I want that to be a card you wheel, because you're going to need it, frankly. In that environment, you need a little help as that control deck there, and the exiling mana leak is actually fantastic, but I don't want you to have to fight for somebody for it. I want you to get it late. And I think the same goes for Meltstrider's Resolve. For Brightglass Gearhulk to be balanced and tuned in the Button Magic Cube, I don't think you should have to fight for Meltstrider's Resolve. I think you should kind of get it for free, and that's a tool you have access to as a cube designer. Right,
or it also reminds me of playing some cubes that have a very different power level of lands. Here's OG Duels next to the tapped typed lands, and as a player, you might just be well, why is this just sucks? Some of these cards are just bad, and I might end up with bad ones. But then suddenly you're halfway through the draft, and you're oh shit, I really need that one typed land to be able to turn all my fetches, and you get one pretty late because they're just not as desirable. And that thing that seems like a flaw in that power level discrepancy actually gives you some space to play around with in a player, because you can understand better what you might expect to wheel in a pack and things like that. So yeah, I think that variety of power level does actually have a lot of benefits and gives handles that players can latch onto.
By comparison, I don't think there is anything in the cube that is not individually very good and playable that you can get with Stoneforge Mystic. All those cards are just good and playable cards. None of them are things you can expect to wheel. So it's draft your Stoneforge Mystic and then fight for the sort of toolbox cards you're going to want, because I don't feel like I need to include a freebie for Stoneforge Mystic to be appealing.
Did you consider adding a guacamole and marshmallow pizza to support Brightglass Gearhulk?
I can't tell if this is a real card or if this is a thing you made up to sound like a troll card. And
50-50. I think it's a real card, but I might be remembering wrong because it's stupid.
So hard to say. Let's hear about some of your toolbox cards, Anthony, before I move on to another one of my cubes.
So my main cube, the regular cube, had actually a couple more than I remembered. The most obvious one, which we already mentioned, is Tribute Mage. So 3-mana 2/2 creature that enters the battlefield and lets you find an artifact that costs exactly 2. I don't know why I put this card in here exactly, but I think I just really enjoy the way that it plays, because it is not the most powerful card on its face, but it does give you this little toolbox. I mean, you'll very, very often have... why can't I remember cards today?
I don't know.
Strix.
Baleful Strix?
Baleful Strix. That's the kind of Strix I'm thinking
know
of.
Which one? I was like, you can't mean Baleful Strix.
Half of that magic card just disappeared from my brain. That's okay.
Angry Owl. Angry Owl made of robots.
Exactly. So hopefully you're getting that if you got lucky in the draft. You might be getting a Perilous Mirror. You might be getting a Maze Mind Tome. And none of these are cards that are like such power outliers. You're like, this is always what I'm getting, which makes it, I think, just a nice little flexible toolbox card. It's also just a kind of great card for a controlling deck that if this was just a 3-mana 2/2 that drew another card and presents a roadblock that you can trade off with while gaining resources from drawing the cards, and if it instead is also gaining you a Baleful Strix, which is going to trade off really well and draw more cards, ends up being like a card that fits into a specific archetype, which I like about it. I think also just the fact that it is more limited also means that it gives players a little bit of a quest during the draft, that they're like looking at this and thinking, okay, for this to be playable, I want to have at least 2, probably 3 or 4 ideally targets for it, because I really don't want to whiff and just have a 3-mana 2/2 no text. So it gives people a little bit of a agenda while drafting their deck. I also like that it's narrow because it just plays a lot quicker than Demonic Tutor, which, like, worst case, somebody says, I cast Demonic Tutor, and then picks up their deck and is like, now what am I actually doing here? And slowly starts pawing through.
What am I doing?
Whereas this is like, okay, do I want my primary target? No, that doesn't make sense on this board. Let me go get the Perilous Mirror because I need to trade off with your important 3/3. The more we play Cube at events, the more just, like, having smooth gameplay and not having those, like, real big gameplay slowdowns is something that's really valuable to me.
That's something I hadn't even considered, but definitely having a narrow set of targets in your deck is really going to expedite the actual tutoring process, which is, I'm sure, as we mentioned in our episode on tutors, one of the downsides is that shuffling does take time. Not everyone shuffles at the same speed. I'm thinking of very few specific players that will just mass shuffle like 15 times. And I'm like,
you can call Sal out on the podcast.
You just got to do 7. You just got to do 7. Everything beyond that is completely pointless. You're wasting all of our time and our one precious life. So it can be valuable to like at least limit the time of that tutor as much as you can. And I think that's one of the upsides from a like broad design perspective of the narrower tutors.
I mean, very similar in the regular cube is Sphinx Summoner, which is just a 5-mana creature that gets another artifact creature. This, I think, fits very much in the same deck that's trying to be a little bit slow and grindy. An important thing about this cube is there aren't like combos that you're using these tutors to get a really specific card that's going to be your main game plan. It's more like, I want a couple targets to get whatever is best on this board state. And I think those 2 cards in particular as tutors feel like they fit, again, into this particular type of deck that I don't want every deck to be tutoring a bunch, but having one that's doing it feels reasonable.
Are there any cards you can think of that you would put in regular cube, but the presence of this tutor means that you think it'd be too good with that card in combination and therefore you have foregone it? Are there any Batter Skulls or Cauldron Completes that come to mind for you?
In this cube, I don't think so, because like the general power level and like tone of the card is already very constrained. I don't think that it would be that risky. I think in another cube like the irregular cube, where there's just like a really big power level band, there's more chance that I would be willing to put in a card that would be a big power outlier in a way that could just like drastically change the way that a certain narrow tutor works. So here, not so much, but I think in tons of cube environments, that would be a reasonable consideration.
I love Sphinx Summoner in the regular cube. I'm a little biased because it was my original suggestion, but I remember like you were looking for another blue-black card. You were like, none of them speak to me, and I hit the Scryfall search, and I was like, wait a minute, this feels like it's just one little line of rules text. Mm-hmm. It's attached to a 3/3 flyer.
Which is relevant.
But very relevant in this cube specifically. If you get both cards, going to get Baleful Strix is obviously incredible, but then Artifact Creature also kind of clues you into the sort of Traxos sort of thing you have going on in the like more artifacty decks, so you can like you can go a couple different directions with it. That's something I really like about these kinds of cards, is even if they don't have like, you know, big combos the way that like Cauldron Complete and Stoneforge Mystic is a combo, I really like when they can play pretty different roles depending on what deck they end up in, instead of just like always getting the same thing. And yeah, like if you're just a random control deck and you're using it to grind, like if you're a Flicker deck, for example, with, you have Soul Herder in that cube, correct?
Oh, no. I think it might have been briefly, but not for a long time.
You do have ways to flicker creatures. It's like a minor theme. So if you end up in a deck with a way to flicker your creatures, then you can just play this for value, basically, and just go get whatever stuff any game pieces will do, versus playing in a deck that you want another copy of Traxos or whatever.
Right. Yeah, I mean, something else is there isn't a 6-mana artifact creature, so this isn't being played as, oh, I'm playing this and drawing my setup for the next turn to curve into, or even, I don't think, another 5-mana spell that you can get with this. So the fact that you're tutoring down on the mana curve is like slightly awkward, but maybe that is actually beneficial for promoting some variety, because it's like, sometimes I do want to get Traxos because I have a bunch of artifacts in my hand. Sometimes I don't have a bunch of artifacts in my hand, so that would be the last thing I want. And instead I'm like, okay, this game seems like it's going to go long, I'll get the Steel Overseer, or I just need another flyer to get through, so find something. And that, I think, encourages a little bit more varied use.
I'm about to change up the artifacts in Sacred Geometry, but can I interest you in a Triskelion in the regular cube?
I don't think I would play it.
You think it's too bad?
I think so, but I could be wrong.
I think it always overperforms people's expectations. You already have a lot of the cards that are in Sacred Geometry to, like, you know, build it into a little package. You have the, what's the black-white reanimation spell that gets 2 small things back or 1 big thing?
Graceful Restoration?
Graceful Restoration alone is going to make Triskelion show up in some deck lists, I would suspect. You've got Steel Overs here, put counters on Triskelion.
Yeah, I mean, it would be cool to see.
It's so clean and simple. We all love a Triskelion.
One more thing in regular cube, which is Goblin Engineer. This, again, I don't know why all the tutoring is related to artifacts. This is Goblin Welder. Artifacts. You can flip artifacts between your graveyard and play, but it also has the Entomb effect, so you get to put an artifact right in the graveyard when it enters the battlefield. This is a little bit more narrow, but another kind of twist on the slow value engine, and in the regular cube, I do like in particular that this is like a red card that is going to force the artifact deck to show up in different forms, where it's like most often base blue-black, but sometimes if you have this in particular, and you have the specific types of artifacts that, you know, generate value from entering the battlefield or moving between the battlefield and the graveyard, that you might want to be splashing red for that as well.
I think this is justifiably another really popular cube card that shows up in a lot of lists. Talk to me about your sort of pool of, because you said it was a Goblin Welder. It's only a Goblin Welder for small things. You got to be 3 mana value or less. Talk to me about your, like, range of options for what kind of artifacts you could bring back, specifically ones that can self-sacrifice. What do you have in terms of self-sacrificing artifacts that you can bring back with Goblin Engineer? We
have Aether Spellbomb, Witching Well, Mnemonic Sphere, Executioner's Capsule. I think that's about it.
I was going to ask if you had removal as an option, and you do an Executioner's Capsule.
Perilous Mirror kind of removal in some cases.
Perilous Mirror definitely counts, especially because the welder can sacrifice it itself.
And Chromatic Star. There's plenty here.
Yeah. So basically you have card advantage, which is like the thing that kind of is for free with Goblin Engineer. Like you could pretty easily put an artifact in there that draws a card or does something, you know, dinky card advantage wise. That's kind of the base rate. But you do have access to removal. What do you have in terms of threats? You have Baleful Strix.
Not as much in terms of threats. I mean, Steel Overseer we mentioned is a relevant threat that takes some time, but we'll eventually get there. Small things like Bomat Courier and what's that little hasty guy? Ginger Brute.
Okay, so nothing really threatening.
Nothing super threatening, no.
I had some really great games this morning playing with Steel Overseer in the Sacred Geometry, where I was playing against an opponent that I knew had a lot of burn removal. I played a turn 2 Steel Overseer, and I was like, I need to figure out how big I want to make this before I start attacking them. They're blue-red control, very few threats. And so, like, I want to be pressuring their life total, but also I was like, I want to make this big enough that it can survive the right balance of removal, because, like, I'm not going to make it big enough that it can survive the Lightning Axe. They have Lightning Axe, that's fine. But I want to make it survive Bolt, I think. And I had this, like, interesting, you know, decision to make of, like, at what point do I start turning sideways with my Overseer instead of just growing it turn over turn.
I'm sure that's a mistake that I have made so many times, is like ending a game one way or another and continuing to put counters on my Steel Overseer rather than realizing when is the time to start attacking with it.
Yeah, at some point you just got to attack with it.
At some point.
It's one of the things I think is nice about Carrion Feeder. Carrion Feeder not being able to block, I think, makes it so much easier to know how to play with that card. Blocking with Carrion Feeder would make it such a paralyzing card in board stalls.
That's a fair point. Yeah, and I think there's a couple things that are maybe on the spectrum, but those are the notable things in regular cube.
You probably wouldn't put Chainsaw in based on flavor, right?
It's a big flavor fail.
It would be a, like, premier Goblin Engineer card.
Yeah.
Like a really, really good Goblin Engineer target.
It's basically Perilous Mirror.
It's a lot better than Perilous Mirror. Again, sort of my, like, list here in order of what I think is, like, ubiquity. And I also have Goblin Engineer in Take 5. I don't want to talk at length about the package there because it's pretty similar to what you just described. I also have Mystical Teachings and Waterlog Teachings now in a lot of cubes. I say a lot. I have Mystical Teachings in Sacred Geometry and Neoclassical and Take 5, 3. And I have Waterlog Teachings in 100 Ornithopters and Take 5. And I think I'm actually going to add Waterlog Teachings to Bun Magic. I was looking at Fetid Pools, and I was thinking, what do I need Fetid Pools here for? I think I just want Waterlog Teachings instead. But we talked about those cards in cards that are cool. And you know what's cool about those is getting a creature with flash. That's what's very cool about those. And also playing multiples of them. I'm not going to talk too much about Recruiter of the Guard. That's a narrow tutor that we already addressed the idea of small creatures that bring other game pieces with them. And the way you dial in what sort of things you can get, you know, whether you include something like a
Hangerback Walker or Walking Ballista?
Walking Ballista is the one I was thinking of. Yeah, whether you include something that basically is a scaling threat, or like whether you intentionally include higher mana value stuff that just happens to still meet the condition of having low toughness for Recruiter of the Guard or Imperial Recruiter or whatever, is an interesting space to play in. And I think that's a good example of, like, you can include some weird 4-drop that, you know, has just 1 toughness that is, you know, comes into play and makes a big token or something, you know, like at one of the Goblin Splicers. You can include like a big Splicer or something, and that's the kind of card that, like, you'd be more likely to get with the Recruiter of the Guard because it might go later if it's not, you know, on power level for the environment.
I love the idea of Recruiter the Guard for Urbis Protector.
Yeah.
That's my kind of magic.
Totally.
But I mean, how do you feel about that overall? Urbis Protector, obviously not a great example, but like Hangerback Walker and Walking Ballista feel like it's kind of like a rules lawyery. The intention is you're supposed to be getting small creatures with this, and that kind of breaks the rules. Do you feel okay with that?
Fine.
Do you feel like it's like a clever thing that you... I mean, obviously it's not like every Magic player is figuring that out from first principles, but in some ways it feels a little broken.
I don't think it's broken. I think it's fine. I think it's like, those cards like Hangerback Walker and, Walking Ballista also like, they do scale pretty fairly. Like, if you're paying 6 mana for a Hangerback Walker, you're getting a 3/3. Like, it's not incredible. I think it's fine, personally. That, to me, wouldn't even be too weird to include in, like, Sacred Geometry, though I have no desire to include Recruiter of the Guard there, I don't think.
Recruiter of the Guard for Newscraft Mob? That's cool magic right there.
Very cool. You are right. But moving down the line, the next one I really want to talk about that I'm excited about is Open the Armory in 100 Ornithopters. This is 1 and a white for a sorcery that just gets you an aura or equipment card from your library and puts it into your hand. So Demonic Tutor in white, but just for auras or equipment. There are a ton of equipments and auras in 100 Ornithopters, especially equipments. Most of them fall into the category of this makes your Ornithopters into threats, which means that the baseline of this is just draw your best, equipment for 2 additional mana, or maybe an aura, which is a pretty cool baseline to just be like, make our equipment decks a little better. There's a lot of other little edges to this card, though, which I really like.
And just to clarify, we're talking about this in 100 Ornithopters, so to the point of, like, what happens when the tutors get broken. Open the Armory easily can be in a cube with a bunch of lion sashes and things that are effectively creatures, which feels like a really similar breaking of the intention, but that's not happening here.
That's not happening here. That would be very cool, I think, in other cubes, potentially, depending on your tolerance for having more access to lion sash. But I think being able to effectively have this get creatures when those creatures happen to also be equipment is very cool. In this cube, though, again, most likely you're just getting more threats, right? However, there are a number of decks that play various combos where one piece of the combo is an equipment or an aura. The first one that comes to mind is the Hammer Time deck. If you're playing Colossus Hammer along with Sigarda's Aid or Hammer of Nazan, which is also an equipment that free equips and makes your other equipments free equip. If you're doing the free equip thing, which is definitely a deck here, this really helps you find either your enabler in the form of Hammer of Nazan or your payoff in the form of Colossus Hammer or Wrecking Ball Arm. So it becomes like now a card that's finding part of your combo in that context, not just like a valuable equipment. There's also a quite strong Jeskai Ascendancy deck, which requires a 0 mana non-creature permanent to go off, and Paradise Mantle is conveniently an equipment and also a 0 mana non-creature permanent. So that's the way you can go with your Open the Armory, which is also on color for Jeskai Ascendancy, obviously. That's a kind of cool way that it can come in.
That's kind of a funny twist on like what you're talking about with the Brightglass Gearhulk, where there's certain cards that are kind of plants for it. Paradise Mantle does not feel like that, right? Like Paradise Mantle is just a powerful card that everybody wants, so you kind of still need to prioritize that. Or is there any redundancy for that? You have a Bone Saw that seems
there's
like
tons
really
of
narrow.
other 0 mana stuff you can play in that cube.
Okay.
It's definitely not the only thing, but it's the only one you can get with Open the Armory. But it is a use case I've seen someone pull off before. It's actually more like this is the kind of cube where you're more likely to get Open the Armory late.
Right, you're going to do it the opposite. That makes sense.
Will have prioritized the Paradise Mantle, and then you might get Open the Armory late and think, well, I'm not a deck that cares about equipment, and then you go, oh wait, actually I am, because I have Paradise Mantle, and this also just triggers Jeskai Ascendancy, which is like as a non-creature spell. Like it kind of just like works and does things you want to do there. I very intentionally wanted to make sure this could get removal, and so this can also get Deconstruction Hammer, which is a equipment you can sacrifice to disenchant something. It can get Sheltered by Ghosts, which is an O-ring that has to be on a creature, which is really strong. And it can get the aforementioned Chainsaw, which is another removal spell. That's kind of a funny one here because you usually don't care about removing individual creatures in this cube, because if you can just remove all of the non-Ornithopter permanents, the Ornithopters that are left tend to not matter, and you can ignore them.
It also only does 3 damage, right? Which gets a lot of Ornithopters get out of scope of that pretty quickly, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's possible. But the nice thing is that the Chainsaw is also very much part of like a synergistic sacrifice deck here. And so you can go and get that. This also goes and gets the Aether Spark, which is a legendary artifact planeswalker equipment, which is just an individually powerful card. Like I've definitely seen this played in decks where it's just like, there's my second copy of the Aether Spark. And like that is a use case that I'm perfectly happy to see. Quicksilver Dagger is another combo card that actually, when I've seen the Jeskai Ascendancy builds that go and get Paradise Mantle, oftentimes they're backup if they like already drew the Paradise Mantle, is Quicksilver Dagger, which is 1 blue-green for an aura that has tap, deal 1 damage to each opponent, and draw a card. It gives a creature that. So that, with Jeskai Ascendancy, means you're drawing 2 cards with every Jeskai Ascendancy trigger, and you're also killing your opponent every time you untap something. It's a win con if you have the actual combo going. Not that you need another win con when you have the actual combo going, generally speaking, but that's another aura you can find that's like very specific. Last couple things here. You can get Shard Mage's Rescue, which is a way to fizzle targeted removal. It gives hexproof to the enchanted creature and has flash. You can like get that to protect your big creature if you know that your opponent has some removal. You can get Footfall Crater, which is a haste and trample enabler in this cube, and a lot of decks that can make a very big Ornithopter really care about being able to give haste and trample. And Footfall Crater you might not think about because it enchants a land. It doesn't enchant the creature, but it is an aura. And so you can get Footfall Crater. In that same category of weird auras that don't enchant a creature, Curse of Opulence and Curse of Predation both enchant your opponent, but are also auras, which you can get with this.
I would not have thought of those. That's good to know.
However, the one I have the most fun with, and the reason I'm like most excited about this sort of package with Open the Armory in this cube is Tempest Technique is an aura, and this is very possible to be your entire win condition in a variety of combo or control decks. This is 3 and a white for an aura that gives +1/+1 to enchanted creature for each enchantment you control, but it has Storm, and so when you cast it, you copy for each other spell cast this turn. You can cast quite a few spells in a turn when there are 100 creatures in the cube that cost 0 mana. So playing this just as like I'm a control deck and I've got Tempest Technique as my like win condition. Eventually I'm gonna like end step, Hurkyl's Recall, or like use Leave to Chance to pick up all but one of my Ornithopters, and then I'm gonna or Paradoxical Outcome is the best way to do it. You pick up all but one of your Ornithopters, you replay them, you get a big Tempest Technique, and then you having Open the Armory to go pick that up is really cool. So it's this card that like on its face, I think people think, oh, this is pretty narrow. Like, I got to have a good equipment to go get. And in reality, it can do so many things. And it's not uncommon for it to be in a deck where it does multiple of those things. Like, it can, go get your Colossus Hammer, or it can go get your Deconstruction Hammer if you need a way to remove your opponent's problematic threat, or your Sheltered by Ghost or something. It's a card I've been really happy with in that cube. And I used to have Steel Shaper's Gift, which is 1 mana to get an equipment. And when I realized how many cool auras there were, I decided it was totally worth 1 extra mana to have Open the Armory instead, so you could get Tempest Technique, so you could get Curse of Opulence, so you could get Sheltered by Ghosts, these cards that otherwise would not be gettable by just the equipment tutor.
It's funny, I feel like we started this conversation saying how the narrowness is actually a benefit, and then you're really excited about this card because of how broad it actually turns out to be. And I think that maybe there is just like some joy, some like interesting, satisfying gameplay moments, like strategic moments to like discovering how to push those boundaries, or like understanding how the boundaries are maybe less constrained than they initially seem, and that can be satisfying.
There's that. I also think just fundamentally, like, you had to draft all the stuff. So it's like, it's not fundamentally very flexible. It's only flexible if you draft the things to make it flexible. You get the power as a drafter to decide, mid-pack 2, do I want to draft this card that is maybe the second best card for my deck by my assessment, but also makes my Open the Armory better, therefore making another card I've already drafted significantly better? Or should I take this, other card that doesn't have that interaction, but is like individually more powerful? It opens up really cool and interesting, I think, draft decisions and deck building decisions that, again, we're talking about how like making it more flexible is cool, and like you could be like, well, why not just play Demonic Tutor? And it's like, well, yeah, but if you do that, you just take it and you put it in your deck, you never think about it ever again. Whenever you draw it, you go get whatever you need. It's a very different way you engage with a tutor like that compared to one you have to like consciously as a player draft and build around.
It's like somewhere in between. There is interesting texture than everything and nothing.
Do you want to talk Turbo Cube? I want to talk Turbo Cube.
I just pulled it up, and I feel like we've talked about most of this already. We talked a little bit about the recruiters, Imperial Recruiter and Recruiter the Guard. Do you think that this is kind of a different space because you are tutoring up like critical win conditions? Like you're getting your, I feel like I keep using the Monk Monastery Mentor as the critical win condition, but maybe like Chrome Host Seed Shark is the one we should be referencing, because I feel like that ends up performing better.
Very similar, I think, those two cards. Just, cards that turn your millions of game actions into actually killing your opponent.
Right, or like get your Psy Master Thopterist. The fact that you are getting like those critical kind of combo pieces, does that make these feel different in this cube as in like the Bun Magic cube?
I mean, they definitely feel different compared to like you play both Tribute Mage and both the Turbo Cube and the regular cube, and like I say, I assume you're on Tribute Mage here, you're right? I would assume?
Yes, Tribute Mage and also Trinket Mage, because there's lots of eggs here you want to get.
Yeah, I think they do feel different in the Turbo Cube, because most of the time you're getting something you can just immediately do. Like, the thing you're getting costs no mana to then do right afterwards. I actually don't think of them as like, go get my Monastery Mentor. I mean, that's great. It's gravy if I have my Monastery Mentor, and I can go get it with one of these like narrow tutors. But really, I'm thinking about like, baseline, these narrow tutors will get me some free card that draws a card or two. And so their baseline going to be just like churning through my deck. And then it has all the upside of like, if I can find something that like my deck really cares about, I have some sort of weird combo or synergy, then yeah, I can go like have that flexibility. But like, I think of them as just like mostly pure value in the Turbo Cube in a way that, the danger of a Turbo Cube is it's so easy to cycle through your deck, but you can sometimes just run out of raw material because there's not a lot of like 2-for-1s where you like get to draw 2 cards for 1. And that's what these things are fundamentally. They put a creature in play, which you can then throw equipment on or like sacrifice later or do something with, and also go get you another card. That's how I baseline think about them in the Turbo Cube.
I mean, that makes me think about Moonsilver Key as well, which just lets you get another egg. And this is an environment where we have all these broken mana positive, card neutral, or card positive eggs. Moonsilver Key and Trinket Mage are both really broken once you have at least one of those to go get, because it's just like more consistent, and Trinket Mage is still mana positive if you go get an egg and crack it for 2 mana, but you do really need those other broken cards first to be able to turn these into broken cards themselves, which is kind of a funny drafting dynamic.
Yeah, and then like if you do have your, Monastery Mentor or Chrome Host Sea Truck in play, then this thing that previously was just like going to give you more card velocity now does the thing. It goes and gets you a thing to cast for the thing, and then you trigger the stuff and do all the stuff like that. That was a terrible explanation, but they work at any stage of the game. They're very just high valued in my mind.
I forget I even have Fabricate, which is just a straight up go search for an artifact. When that only costs 1 blue mana, if you just need more, like you're saying, more like...
Take more game actions.
Yeah, if you need more game actions, you can just go get an egg from this, and that's still a mana positive interaction. Or, do what is maybe more intended is go get your actual win condition, get the Aether Flux Reservoir so you can actually take advantage of all those spells you're casting, all those actions you're taking. Often you do just like put Fabricate in your deck and then get something that seems like not a very powerful card because that's just what you need.
You should cut Ring of Valkus for Corey Steelcutter. Corey Steelcutter should be in the Turbo Cube for sure.
Have you considered Ring of Valkus is super cool? Putting that on my list for cards that are cool, part 3.
I don't care what you cut. I think you should put Corey Steelcutter in the Turbo Cube. Put it on your list of cards to eventually acquire.
Sure.
You only get to make the 1 token a turn, but it's a haste enabler. It gives the thing prowess, or it makes prowess tokens. It's, I think, fantastic.
The plan with the Turbo Cube remains to make it much bigger next year.
Sure.
Within the next year.
Great. Keep Ring of Valkus, add in Corey Steelcutter.
Exactly.
That sounds great.
We did already mention Wizardcycling, and Step Through is in this cube. Step Through is free to cycle in this cube, and there are also some very powerful changelings.
Let's do a wizard comparison between Take 5 and Turbo Cube, because I think this could be interesting comparison there.
All right, how many wizards you got?
I can't actually type an easy Scryfall search to figure it out because I have like kindred spells and stuff, and it's complicated. I think I have like 16.
Okay, well, fine. Name your best wizards. What are we working with?
So in Take 5, I also have Step Through. For those who don't know, this is a 5 mana bounce 2 creatures spell that also has Wizardcycling for 2. Wizardcycling is very cool. The wizards I'm most excited about in Take 5 are Retu Mystic is a wizard that gives all of your creatures cycling for 1 and a blue.
Right. I played with that card 3 days ago.
It's cool. We all love it. I have some build-around wizards in Emery and Tameshi and Orvar the All form, which is a very cool build-around wizard. If you happen to have a couple of ways to target your permanents, you can get an Orvar that make copies of all the permanents you can target with your spells, and just having another copy of that is great. I love having Umara Wizard in my Step Through deck, because then my Step Through can go get me a land, because Umara Wizard is an MDFC with land on the back and a wizard on the front.
That's pretty cool.
Very cool. Nameless Inversion. It's a wizard.
It's a wizard. We promise.
Everything's a wizard. Nameless Inversion is everything. That's probably one of the most powerful things to get with it, to be perfectly honest. There's other things that make Nameless Inversion very good in that cube. Those are the ones that I'm really excited about, I would say.
Okay. In the Turbo Cube, we have Snapcaster Mage, which I have had somebody wizard cycle for Snapcaster Mage, cast Snapcaster Mage, and cast the Step Through, which was maybe the most demoralizing thing that's ever happened to me in a game of Magic. That can't be true, but it was up there. We do have the aforementioned Trinket and Tribute Mages, as well as Tishana's Tidebinders, so some powerful interaction. Really, the most important one is 3-Tree Mascot, because that's basically just a Moxen, but sometimes does even more broken stuff.
I can't believe you can stomach Tishana's Tidebinder in that cube. That's one of my least favorite cards ever printed, I think.
Whenever it gets played, it does horrible things.
It's horrible. It's horrible. And you have to read it again every time you play it, because you can name anything, and it can counter any ability, but only if that thing's ability is of a certain type card, then it prevents it for the rest of the game.
I like that it is like powerful interaction against a lot of the broken stuff that you're doing here, but you're right, it is always confusing, and in a cube that already risks going to time because there's so much going on, that's not necessarily a positive. So you could talk me out of that pretty easily.
I think you should make it Trick Bind.
Trick Bind. I have so many Scryfall tabs open now.
That's how you know you're living a good life. I would play a Trick Bind in there.
Interesting. I'll think about it.
I didn't mention Fate Stitcher. I do love Fate Stitcher.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of other good wizards here. We also have Armory, we got Phyrexian Censor if you're just trying to shut your opponent out, and Mirror Entity if you have a bunch of mana and want to win the game.
I think it's a tie. I think we both have equally cool wizard packages.
Cool wizards.
Show me your wizard package. I'll pull out mine, and we can compare wizard packages and decide which one is better.
That's what we just did, and we decided they're equal. Yeah, I think that's pretty much all the tutors in the Turbo Cube as well. I mean, like we said, there's plenty of like land tutors and kind of more marginal things. I still feel similar where it's like the more narrow ones work better for me because of, you know, the faster gameplay actually sort of pushing you in an interesting direction that forces you to think about the way that you're building your deck, the way that you're drafting. But I do still appreciate the downsides of, yeah, they take time. They can sometimes homogenize gameplay. I don't know. Where do you land?
I want to talk about a couple more in Take 5 before we wrap it up. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Take 5 is like the perfect cube for these kinds of narrow tutors, and I play a ton of them, many of which we've already talked about are included here. I try to avoid ones that are individually very powerful. Like I would never put Brightglass Gearhulk here. That would be just insane, even if you found nothing, because this is the kind of cube where you're not supposed to get a 4-mana, 4/4 first strike and trample.
This is also a particularly interesting context because you're forcing players to play with almost all of their cards.
Yeah.
So if you have a very narrow tutor, you kind of need to really prioritize having something to do with it, right? Is that kind of intentional to the design?
Well, I think almost all of them, I would say there's enough things to do with it that you will have some incidentally, but you have to prioritize the good things to do with it. What I want is a lot of like, I guess I just wizard cycle for a land because I have 2 wizards and the other wizard is bad right now. You know, like I want some amount of like you're doing the non-intended, like the least optimized thing with the narrow tutor. I don't want a lot of like you completely whiff. And so that's a consideration. Another one I play there is Scrapyard Recombiner, which is a 3-mana modular creature with modular 2. It has sacrifice an artifact, tap it to search your library for a construct card, reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. This does a lot of the same things that Step Through does because it gets constructs, of which there are a number of them, but it also gets Nameless Inversion and Orvar the All Form, these things that have all creature types, even though in the case of Nameless Inversion, it's not even a creature, and it's very cool to, you know, sacrifice an artifact to go get your Nameless Inversion. I like that quite a bit. I also include, and I save this for the end because maybe this is going to be the siren song of these. I include 2 Transmute cards here, Shred Memory and Perplex. What the cards do in the front side doesn't really matter. I mean, they're castable, certainly, but they both are mostly here for their Transmute modes. And Transmute says you can pay the Transmute cost. In both cases, it's 3 mana, depending on and then colors of the card, to discard this card and search your library for a card with the same converted mana cost. So Shred Memory can find you any 2-drop, Perplex can find you any 3-drop. I include these here because I wanted them to be more flexible, narrow tutors to like support these weird packages of cards. So actually Shred Memory was specifically included when I was like, I wish I had one more way to tutor for Sundial of the Infinite, because that's a build around card here that you can definitely have your whole deck be built around. And there's a number of ways to tutor for artifacts in the cube already, but I was like, I want a couple more, and especially wanted ones that were not in like the artifact searching colors. Like, you know, red has a million ways to put Sundial of the Infinite in play, but black has barely any. So
you could put Demonic Tutor in.
I could. This is not the cube for Demonic Tutor, but it is the cube for Shred Memory, which is cool. You can go get your Sundial the Infinite. Many of the things that combo with Sundial also cost 2. So you can, like, if you have your Sundial in play, you can go get your Final Fortune, or you can go get your, you know, whatever, and then like have the other piece of the combo at hand. Perplex goes and gets 3-drops. Similar idea here. Like, there's lots of build around 3-drops that I want you to have access to, and it's kind of a cool, weird card to have in your deck. These cards, of all the ones we've talked about, though, have been the ones that I think have been some of the most paralyzing in this context specifically, where players oftentimes have to stop and say, I don't know if I want to transmute this right now. It has a main mode. I could just cast it. I don't know how good transmuting it is because I don't remember what all the 2-drops or 3-drops are in my deck. So I have to like consult a deck picture or just resign myself to not knowing if casting it is ideal or not, which a competitively minded player will never do.
Right. That's such a funny difference where if you say, here's Enlightened Tutor, you will think about and have better recall for what are the artifacts and enchantments in your deck that you drafted and care about, like for that card specifically, versus what are the 3-drops in your deck is going to be such a more difficult question, I would imagine, for any Magic player to answer, because you're just not used to thinking in that way most of the time.
What I do now that I've played with these a bunch is like, I try before the draft, just lay out the cards that I can get with it. And just laying them out visually, I can like then take a little mental snapshot and like, or a real snapshot on my phone, but like take the moment during deck building to like consider like, okay, can I get removal with this? Can I get a threat with this? Is there like a silver bullet I can get with this, or like a key card my deck cares about I can get with this? If you haven't done that though, it's definitely very paralyzing. I think the bigger problem between them and Enlightened Tutor is that you can also just cast them. Enlightened Tutor,
also true.
If you have the mana available, you're just going to cast it, you'll figure it out on the spot, who cares? I think the paralyzing moment for the Transmute cards comes in the, do I actually even want to transmute this? Because the transmuting is a mode. It's not the only thing you can do with the card. Perplex is also a weird cancel, and Shred Memory is a Grave Hate spell, which matters a lot in this cube. There's a lot of graveyard-based strategies and a lot of reasons to have Grave Hate at your disposal. So I think they're going to come out with the next edit of Take 5, and I think it's interesting because we talked about all of the advantages and like cool edge cases and cards we've really found a lot of joy in, including in our cubes that are narrow tutors, and these are two examples where I think, honestly, the problem is that the tutor mode is just one of the available modes. I think is the biggest thing. The second biggest thing being that they are a little harder maybe to conceptualize of what your targets are, because you have a lot of 2-drops in your deck, probably more than 3, unless you drafted really badly, which is not necessarily the case with, you know, a Stoneforge Mystic. You're like, I got a couple in equipment. Like, I know if I've drawn 3 of them, that's it. I have no more targets, right? Like, it's just the right amount of information to process that like gets a little bit paralyzing. And yeah, the sort of paralysis of do I cast it or not? And there's the additional problem with these two transmute cards, maybe specifically, they're both instants and you can only transmute into a sorcery.
Right.
So you don't get to like hold it up, and then if you don't have anything to perplex, you can just transmute it away. You have to like proactively choose to transmute as a sorcery, and that means you're foregoing holding up that instant. That decision point, I think, is causing a lot of burned cycles of people's brains in this cube right now.
I was going to ask that as well, because when I read it, it's like I expect it to be instant speed, because that's how I want to play with the card. Is like, here's my counterspell with like exit mode in case counterspell doesn't work, but you can't actually use it that way. So
right, and it'd be so good if you could. Like, both these cards would be kind of insane if you could transmute at instant speed. I think.
But sorcery speed, 3 mana to get a 2 mana spell. Again, like when you're tutoring in reverse of mana, you have to be getting something that is pretty powerful or like pretty relevant on that board state, and I don't know, it does feel a little bit weird. And to your point, especially that they are instants, but you have to do the other mode at sorcery speed is a little bit dissonant.
Yeah, you can't look down at the type lines in your hand and be like, great, I can just hold up mana and pass the turn. And also, you know, people are not used to activated abilities being at sorcery speed, because by default they're at instant speed, so it has to say it.
Right.
They're just kind of clunky. And this is not a cube where, like, I am afraid of complexity, obviously. This is by far my most complicated cube, and I'm okay with that. But this is a good example of, like, all these things together, I think, just make for cards that are, frankly, just taking their time sucks. The amount of time sucks they are is not worth the value add they're adding to the environment, which I only say to, like, as a comparison to Doomsday. Doomsday takes forever to resolve. Like, it's by far the most time-consuming card to resolve in the cube.
But then the game should be over, right?
But then the game is over, and it's also so cool. It enables so many cool strategies, and I think it is worth the time suck on Doomsday. These cards are adding a, like, kind of similar, like, drag and slowdown to, like, people figure out what to do with them, and the upside is it's pretty marginal. So there's the dark side of narrow tutors.
Transmute, the effect the mechanic they've never come back to for good reason.
I want to take this moment, Anthony, at the end of this episode here, to make an appeal to you. And listeners, sound off in the comments if you agree with me and think Anthony should make this change, or if you think I'm wrong, Anthony should not make this change. I feel pretty strongly, having reflected on it, that you should, in Cube Cobra on the Turbo Cube, change all the mana values of all the cards to be their effective mana value in the Turbo Cube. Because right now, you have not overridden the mana values, so anything that's a 2-drop printed is in the 2-drop slot, and that includes colorless 2-drops, which are actually 0 mana, alongside, you know, cards that have 1 pip, which are actually 1 mana, and in the rare cases, cards that have 2 pips in. Do you have any 2-pip 2-drops in that cube? Probably not.
Don't think so.
Yeah, that would have to be crazy powerful for it to make sense to still cost 2 whole mana. I think it would actually make it so much more sane. I know you're like, oh, but the deck builder would look silly.
And this is also the perfect episode for me to remind you that it would make finding what cards you can get with Trinket Mage versus Tribute Mage impossible.
Yeah, but that's, I think, that's marginal.
I don't think it is that marginal. It also make it so much more confusing. Like, how does Thorn of Amethyst work now?
No, come on.
Yes.
This is not real. This is not a real counter argument, surely. I think it would actually make so much more sense in the deck builder to see them stacked up in the appropriate columns, because that's the first way I lay out my cards when I obviously draft the Turbo Cube. I lay them out into cards that cost no mana, cards that cost 1 mana, cards that cost more than 1 mana. I hope there are very few of you. You better be really good if you cost more than 1 mana. And that exercise is actually like a tiny bit more like mental energy than I always expect. Like, I always kind of put something in the wrong place. I'm like, oh, actually, you actually go here or whatever. I think the fact that all the 1 mana value artifacts and the 2 mana value artifacts that all are colorless are actually the same cost is like not intuitive or clear. And I think you should just shuffle it all up and make them all match on Cube Cobra.
I think that would be so confusing. I think the easier,
well, here's the thing.
The easier, better solution is Gwen should simply build this feature into Cube Cobra to have a checkbox
to say is Turbo Cube. I was just going to say, if you think it's a problem, the good news is Gwen has built the feature to disable overridden mana values. So your current view already accessible, and you are depriving users of the other view, which they could have access to. Right now, they can't even access it.
Okay, well, that's frustratingly compelling.
I know, isn't it?
I'll think about it.
Yell at me in the
It's
comments.
also going to take me like 3 hours.
It's not going to take 3 hours. You can download it as a spreadsheet and then write a little script to do it, and then upload it again.
Okay, now I'm in.
Yeah.
Writing a little script with a spreadsheet?
A fun little script to parse the mana, cost column and then, turn it into the correct mana value.
I mean, I've already got some of that written.
Yeah. Anyway, yell at me in the comments if you think I'm wrong. Yell at Anthony if you think he's wrong. And that's the evergreen statement about this podcast. You can always yell at us in the comments. We don't read them. That's not true. I read most of them, but I don't respond to almost any of them.
Should we also commit to our next book club book and announce that?
Oh, sure. Yeah. We kind of picked one. I forget what it was. What was it?
The Score by C.T. Nguyen. And we'll put a link to it in the episode notes.
And that's one that Parker has already read, and we'll revisit.
Yes.
And you came across this recommendation where?
He was interviewed, was it on 99% Invisible? Or it was in the 99% Invisible feed. It's still great. Recommend 99% Invisible for all you out there.
I just can't produce shows where they're like...
I know. That's the only reason you're not into it.
There's a little clinky music, and they're like, this train station is different than every other train station in a way that you just can't imagine when you first look at it.
Slow down just a little bit more. And modulate your voice a little. We got to dial in your Roman Mars impression.
I don't do a Roman Mars impression.
It's been years since you've heard him speak. So
yeah.
Anyway, The Score by C.T. Nguyen. I then also listened to a couple other interviews he did on some other podcasts, and I just really appreciate his perspective on the way that scoring systems influence the way that we think about things.
Sounds like a perfect book club book that I will definitely read.
You will read it. It'll be great.
I'm medicated now, so I have no excuse. And on that bombshell, that is the end of this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. Thank you so much for tuning in. All the music for this show is produced by DJ James Nasty, and the show is edited by Matthew. All the magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast, and this podcast is produced by thinking really hard about magic cards and speaking into microphones about it. Anthony, thank you for the gift of friendship and for the gift of Cube.
And thank you for letting me know about that Cube Cobra feature that will make work for me now.
I think Gwen literally built it because of the conversation on our podcast and about how Julian hated how I reshuffled things. Because when he made the feature live, he said, "Julian, I fixed this for you," and mentioned Julian in one of the Discords.
Just speak your requests into the ether.